So the backlash for Metroid Prime 4 has been going on long enough now that people are beginning to notice certain things. Very specifically, that critics of the game have been straight up making things up about it ever since we started seeing previews of the game a couple of weeks ago. Okay, where like I was told, like screamed at about how Miles would be with you throughout the entire game and how he would be yapping in your ear and how he'd be telling you everything you need to do to beat the game. And now that the game's actually out, we can see that isn't actually true. And there are dozens of examples of that. I'm seeing people say there is no autosave. I'm seeing people say that there are features locked behind amiibo. I'm seeing people say that the game is like shorter than other Metroid Prime games. I'm seeing people say that the game is completely broken and unfun. Like I'm seeing people like make all these accusations about it, like the game's development and just the story and just the more I play the game, the more I realize that I do really, really, really like it. Like I enjoy this game quite a lot actually. So it's been very frustrating kind of seeing this initial like attempt at subverting and destroying this game and but it's also equally gratifying to see like the narrative fall apart. Like we are already seeing people like try and say that like they can emulate this game on their high-end gaming PCs, which we know that isn't true. And second of all, if they're talking about emulating the game, like that means they know that they've already lost, and they kind of have to acknowledge that this game is great. It's really odd, like looking at like what's happened here and seeing people like scream about this because it really does feel like the vast majority of people in the gaming community have no familiarity with Metroid at all outside of its reputation online because like, how many times did we see like people screaming about loneliness and isolation in this game, and how there is no talking and there are no NPCs, and it's just like that's a mindset like that hasn't been true in like 20 years. Okay, like the whole like no NPC and no talking thing was just like a hardware limitation. Like Samus has never been a silent protagonist. Samus Super Metroid begins with Samus like expositing like going over like the events of the first two games. Right? Like it's that's just the simple reality of it. When you look at what what the controversy actually is, like it feels as if the people complaining have never played Metroid Prime 2, have never played Metroid Prime 3, have never played Metroid Prime Hunters, have never played Metroid Prime Federation Force, who don't have any experience with Metroid at all outside Super and the original Prime. Like that's the weird thing about this is because I'm seeing so many people come out and say that like, oh, this is nothing like Prime One. This is radically different, and like real fans are coming out saying that like this is a lot like Prime Two. It's a lot like Prime Three. Like it, it's like people don't understand that the series has been growing and evolving since the original Prime, and it's very interesting to like kind of think back and like wonder why this is and why there's such a weird like dissonance between like fanboy weird pretendo like pseudo fanboy rhetoric versus like actual genuine fans, right? So what you're seeing is just this weird like what you're seeing is a typical example of what happens when every time a new Metroid game comes out. Because typically what happens is that these people come out and they do this thing where they're just like the song and dance where they're just like, Metroid's the only good Nintendo IP. It's the only one I care about. It's the only one I'll get a Switch for, a Nintendo console for. It's the only thing I care about. Metroid is the best, and it's the only thing I'm a fan of because it's such a cool, mature adult franchise that handles adult themes and is made for hardcore gamers. And anybody who's played a Metroid game knows that's not true. Okay, like these games are not like rated M for manly. Okay, like you don't even get to play as a man in it. Like you are like it is. Anybody who's played these games did so when they were very, very, very young. Okay, like people don't seem to want to understand that these games are targeted towards a younger demographic. Like even though that they're older, like there's always been like an older periphery demographic who thinks this is supposed to be like I don't know, like Nintendo's Halo or Mass Effect or whatever. In reality, like Metroid is and always has been better than that. Like Metroid is something that can be enjoyed by all ages, really. Like, and honestly, at this point, like I wouldn't even say it's like Nintendo's most like mature IP. Like I think Xenoblade and Fire Emblem have surpassed that like quite a long time ago. But looking at this game, like looking at the backlash towards it, like it's so interesting seeing that so many people have adopted these weird like pseudo like fan fiction like hopes about the series. Like so many people like genuinely are getting upset at the fact that Prime 4 isn't exactly like their image of what Metroid should be. And that's really what they're complaining about. Like when you get right down to it, it's not that like this game is bad or that it's unintuitive or that it has all these things wrong with it. Like the issue with it in its core cores is that like this game isn't like the major AAA like Western generic slop that every other game is. Like this isn't Dead Space, this isn't Mass Effect, like this is Metroid. Okay. And so people are very, very upset at this idea that this game is like a Nintendo game. Like playing this and realizing that this is a Nintendo game is very, very off-putting to a lot of these people who LARP as hardcore fans. Like, and every single time they have to come out and start disavowing this game. We saw it with Federation Force. We saw it with Dread. We saw it with Samus Returns. Oh, by the way, I love how people are pretending that like Samus Returns and Dread were well received. By the way, they were not. We saw a lot of these same issues when those games first came out, and over time they became more popular, especially Dread. But yeah, there was a lot of backlash towards those games as well. Okay, yeah. So we saw the same thing with Dread, with Samus Returns, with Federation Force, with Other M, with Metroid Prime 3, with Metroid Prime 2, right? Like I feel like people really forget how controversial Metroid Prime was when it first came out because a lot of people would tell you that like it plays more like a Zelda game than a Metroid game and like instead of acknowledging that like Zelda is good too and that the changes in gameplay made perfect sense, and that Metroid Prime had its own unique identity from 2D Metroid. There was an entire thing, an entire movement for a long time that like 2D Metroid was better than Prime. And I actually do like prefer 2D Metroid than Prime, but there's no denying that Prime has its own like unique personality and vibe and like design philosophy. Like it was a very successful spin-off franchise, but instead of celebrating this spin-off and what it accomplished, the fan base demeaned and like disrespected it. Like honestly, I think the only reason Prime like got as much attention as it did because Fusion was so much more controversial. Like again, Fusion was hated too. Like again, it's very very interesting looking back at the history of this IP and seeing just how common it is. Like every single release for these like naysayers that come out crawling out of the woodwork and start complaining about like things that don't make any sense. Like I still see people complaining about Metroid Fusion being linear even now that like the game is old enough now to be considered a bona fide Game Boy Advance classic and one of the best games on the console. I still see people doing complaining about it. Like I still see people trying to complain about like Prime 3 and what that tried to do. Like playing Prime 4 has been really really interesting because like I think this is the first time ever that we've seen any major pushback to Metroid criticisms because when Dread came out, like a lot of people were eating up all this negativity and all this like nonsense, and people had written it off, and then it became popular, like a couple of years after the fact, where people were like, declaring it to be better than Super and all that. And there were a couple of reasons for that. People like me came back for a second playthrough, played it on hard mode. Like Dread gets better with time, honestly. And I think that's something that a lot of people just were not anticipating, that people would go back to Dread, reevaluate it, and realize it's actually one of the better games in the series. Prime 4 is interesting because I don't think it's as good as Dread, but because of the nature of it, because of like the structure and the visual quality, the gameplay, like how difficult it is, the great boss fights, um, the tone and the vibe. Like Metroid Prime 4, unlike Dread, is getting like a real genuine pushback to the criticisms. Like you're already seeing people like go to bat for this game, like calling out all of these people on the nonsense. So many of the hot take like criticisms have been like debunked over the past couple of days, and they're always putting out more all the time. They're always coming up with like new insane copes to like downplay this game, and it's just like it's very clear to me at this point that like this has been a very successful release. This has been a very successful game. Like everyone's very very happy with it. But like the simple fact of the matter is Metroid is one of those IPs that the Western video game industry absolutely could not allow to become popular. Like the reason why these games are so reviled in gaming journalism circles is because they know that the instant that Metroid is allowed to be seen as better than Halo, better than Dead Space, better than Mass Effect, like it's over. Like they'll never ever recover from that. The genie will never go back in the bottle. So they have to do this thing where they have to pretend that every major release is like super controversial in order to keep up the illusion that Nintendo doesn't make games like this. And that's why you see this happen every single time with Metroid. And I think with Fire Emblem and Xenoblade to a certain extent as well, is that like the gaming industry has to keep up the illusion that there are no games for older players on this console in order to drive people to Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. Because without that, like those consoles really have nothing going for them. Their entire grift just kind of collapses. So what we're seeing now is just the beginning of the end of a decades-long conspiracy to try and downplay Metroid as a viable Nintendo IP. One of the reasons this series has never become more than a million seller is because of these endless controversies that just endlessly just downplay and ignore these games. Like these games should be doing a lot better than what they are. But the simple fact of the matter is, like every single time one comes out, we see these endless amounts of controversy. And this is the first time those kinds of nonsensical complaints are being pushed back against. And I think this is a very strong indication that Metroid's future as a franchise is very, very bright. We are beginning to see the end of the coping and the seething.